What is creativity?
Creativity is novelty plus value. So it has to be new to be creative, otherwise you're just copying. And value could just be aesthetic value, or if it's a product, it could be, retention, how much value the users get, how much they're willing to pay for it. That's the academic definition we've had for decades.
And are humans naturally gifted at being creative, or is this something we have to learn from books and other people, or is this like an innate trait with us?
Creativity, and I'll go as far as saying even hallucination, is inherent to how the human brain operates. And what makes AI so amazing is that it finally works using a similar mechanism. That's why it's as good as it is today.
And how does artificial intelligence and the human brain relate in terms of creativity and hallucination? Can you say more about that?
So every moment we predict what's going to happen. The way that we operate in the world is literally by predicting over and over and over again. And when something unexpected happens, we actually update our algorithm. That's how we survive. That's how we thrive in the world. And AI does the same thing. So it predicts and then it sort of agrees with itself when it creates. So this whole process of prediction, if you amplify it in either humans or machines, you start sort of deviating from the most likely outcome, and you end up getting these deep dream-like images. I don't know if you've seen those kind of old Google deep dream images. They look like human hallucinations. So when the human brain is amplified and the machine brain is amplified, it becomes very, very obvious that we think in a similar way because you end up with hallucinations on both ends.
We're taking the neural network from the brain, abstracting it and applying it to AI, and now artificial intelligence can create and hallucinate in the same way.
In a very similar way, yeah, it's also neurons and connections between neurons. We learn from sensory input, the machine learns from data streams. But ultimately, the reason it works is because it's a brain, and we finally have enough power to make the brain big enough. And that was really the big sort of bigger is better in this case.
What do we say to the folks, myself included, who may look at neural networks not similar to human brains? They're just based off of or mimicking brain structures, but they're not actually the way human brains operate.
What we have today is the closest imitation we've ever had of the human brain. That's why we're seeing so much emergent behavior. But it's not identical, right? Like, for example, one of the biggest differentiators is that one way that we survive is by having emotion. So emotions actually help us survive. Strong feelings are here for a reason. It's not just sort of decorative. Um, and machines don't have emotions. That part has not been imitated. It's not integrated into there. There's a lot of other stuff we know about the human brain that's not integrated. Um, so it's both very similar and very different at the same time.
I want to just take a couple steps back when you talked about hallucination and creativity. What do hallucinations do for creativity? Just in the context of humans, then we can apply them to AI. But what is the role of hallucination and creativity?
So hallucination is sort of the breaking free and exploring different possibilities, right? Um, it's it's really the engine of creativity, deviating from the truth, deviating from what exists, going somewhere new, right? Now, if we're dealing with a context where you want a lookup table, where you want a search engine, then that's very upsetting, right? But if you are, writing a song or making art, then you want to go somewhere new. And so in both human and machine, it's sort of about shutting down that inner critic and going to brand new places. By the way, did you know that humans who are the most creative also lie the most? Not because they're mean people, but because their brain just naturally deviates from the truth. So they even sort of self-deceive more than others.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. And it's interesting because we're using hallucination and creativity not synonymously, but kind of in the same positive connotation. But modern AI culture, modern AI lingo uses hallucination in the negative connotation. If you're asking the AI about George Washington, and they're like, George Washington was the 67th president of the United States, you'd be like, oh, it's a hallucination, that's bad. So one thing I learned from Mark Andreessen actually is that when we want the hallucination, it's called creativity. When we don't want the hallucination, it's referred to as a hallucination. You're nodding, and you contend with this.
Well, I think it's brilliant. I think I wish more people knew this quote that you just said, because that's exactly it, right? When you want the child to be imaginative, you praise when they do something new. And when you want them to recite facts, you get mad when they go off the beaten path. But if you want to have a brain that's sort of based on how we think, hallucinations are inevitable. Would you ever expect a person to be correct 100% of the time? Any person. The world's top doctor is not correct. Nobody, no human being is correct 100% of the time. And yet we freak out when a machine makes a mistake. I think what we need to adjust is our expectations. It's not reasonable to expect it to be right all the time. It's not trying to hurt us. The companies don't hate us. We shouldn't, without hating it, we shouldn't trust it so much because it's prone to hallucination by the way that it works.
Well, let me push back on that because when we use calculators, for example, they're right. Let's say 99% of the time. I don't exactly know if it's 100%, but
100.
okay, so we can comfortably say 100% of the time. But if I was using my calculator after getting used to it being right 100% of the time, and then it starts saying 2 plus 2 equals 73, I'd probably get a little upset, right? And so isn't there kind of like this embedded cultural expectation for machines to be correct 100% of the time? But we're talking about, is it wrong to expect that?
So this is a brilliant question because the reason we believe it comes from the Industrial Revolution. For machines that were deterministic, we told them exactly what to do. We knew exactly what needs to happen under each scenario, and we got it to do things exactly right. Mistakes would still happen with some machinery, but that was a really, really, really bad thing. It was sort of not listening, or there was some kind of bug, right? So what's really interesting right now is that we're in a new era. We have machines that are different. This is not the same type of AI. This is not the same type of machinery. It works very differently from a calculator. It's a brain. For the first time, we have brains that are more similar to ours than anything we've ever had before. And so the way that that type of thinking works is not going to be correct 100% of the time. And the more we constrain it, the more we make it behave, the more we choke the creativity out of it. When you have a person who is kind of really tries really, really hard to never, ever, ever be wrong, they're also cutting creativity out. So there's this inherent trade-off. And we don't want to choke LLM's creativity so badly that it's never wrong, because then it's going to be really boring and dry and not as useful in other contexts. So this is a new type of machine. That's really the bottom line.
And how do we kind of, this is more maybe a socio-technological question, but how do we get people to understand that there's actually maybe a benefit to the machine hallucinating? Because here's the thing, and this is something that I'm actually learning as we speak, is when we're looking at the George Washington example, and I'm asking, I have no clue who George Washington is. I need to write an essay for school. My expectation from Google before is it's going to give me the exact right answer on George Washington, or it's going to give me links to the exact right answer on George Washington. So as I grow up with technology, I'm expecting to get the exact right answer from these search engines. ChatGPT comes along and it says George Washington is the 67th president of the United States. So my embedded behavior is to immediately accept that. But what we're talking about is maybe a more distant relationship. It's holding the relationship at arm's length and saying, let me think about it more to try to pry creativity out of this.
So I love what you're saying, but let's sort of move back a little bit. Like, why do you have this belief, right? Generative AI has existed in academia for several decades, actually. And the original OpenAI models, they were generative models. You would give it a sentence, and it would make up imaginative ways to convert it into a paragraph. Then they had an epiphany. Let's turn it into the sci-fi all-knowing oracle. And they decided to turn it into a chatbot. And they created this expectation that it's going to tell you the truth. They took something that was imaginative for decades and decided to tell everybody that it's going to tell you the truth through alignment, which works to some degree, but not completely. And so it's the reason that you expected, and a lot of the listeners here expected, is because that's the expectation we were fed, right? Now, we don't have to believe these companies because the fact is that those systems are wrong a lot. And instead of being angry at the companies or angry at the AI, we accept the fact that the reality is that it's prone to hallucination, it's prone to imagination. And that's, if I may, for me personally, that's not a reason to have a more distanced relationship with it. It's just kind of like I wouldn't trust a person at face value for everything they say, and I certainly wouldn't trust ChatGPT. It doesn't mean that I don't have positive affect towards it. Doesn't mean that it's not very valuable in other ways.
But we're still not making eye contact with the inevitable behavior of especially young people. My generation suffers from this immediately, which is we just use ChatGPT or generative AI, expect it to be this oracle of absolute truth and go about our way. So again, we have to take a step back, but how do we take that step back? Because again, we'll get into your book. We can use generative AI for creativity, but in order to do that, we cannot use it in the way where it's absolute.
I think it's great for research. You just have to verify it. It's just a little bit of extra time, right? So if there's a topic that I know very well, then I see a lot of gaps in what it produces, a lot of gaps, which is a problem because that tells me that if I use it for something that I don't know very well, then I'm not even aware of the gaps that are there. And it's a known fact that ChatGPT is not a top expert at anything. So, but at the same time, if I'm looking for some simple information, what I do is I quickly verify. Just very, very quick Google search, or I ask it to give me a scientific publication that justifies what it said. And that way, I can very, very quickly verify it. But yeah, you cannot use it instead of a search engine. It's very, very dangerous. It's just not a good use case.
And have you seen, well, maybe you're the wrong person to ask because you were already cognizant of these things, but is there a way maybe that you've experienced young people taking a step back and, not over leveraging themselves and treating it with absolute truth and all of that? Because the way we treat humans is the way we treat technology, and now vice versa.
I've seen all kind of cases. So first of all, I think it's really important to educate young people that this thing is prone to hallucination and to do it without this rage. It's just a fact. It's an amazing machine. It's so useful in so many ways. Don't trust it blindly because it's prone to errors. Like that's not an insult to the tech, right? So let's start there. I've seen all kind of interesting cases with young people. I think the most important one to share is that there was a lovely young student who was asked, I've had this project that I've given for many years, asking students to come up with original creative system ideas that they would build throughout the quarter. And I've done this for years, well before LLMs became commonplace, and everybody could ultimately come up with original ideas. Original ideas exist. We can access them. And this student brought a whole bunch of ChatGPT generated ideas. It was really, really obvious to me that that was the case. So I asked him to please come up with an idea without ChatGPT. And he looked at me like I'm an alien. And, and he was just not capable of following that instruction. And I think that level of believing that ChatGPT is smarter than you it can be very bad for a human being's development because it's not even true. It's not even true. The students who were willing to come up with their own ideas came up with better stuff.
Why do you think they so quickly accepted that ChatGPT is smarter than them? Seems like an insecurity.
Science fiction.
Okay, science fiction.
Science fiction. I think it's well. That's right. That's right. So insecurity might. I think is very insightful what you're saying here. So it probably plays into the formula. But science fiction is fundamentally what showed us this idea that robots are going to overtake us. AI is going to be smarter than us and then kill us all. Just for fun. That's that last part. And it's this sort of sci-fi idea, which has been so deep in our culture, really, really, really impacts entrepreneurs, massively impacts how investors think about AI, and also impacts consumers, right? So instead of looking at what we actually have in front of us, just look at what we have. Look at what the system is capable of doing or not. It's not a secret. We stick to this idea of this all-knowing oracle, even when it simply does not exist.
I want to have some fun in this conversation and not be super serious, but if we can walk that line, why do you think the idea of creating a machine that's smarter than one human or smarter than all humans, immediately it would kill us off? Why do you think we made that leap?
Why did sci-fi writers decide to share this vision? I think that it's okay, my subjective opinion is that it's something that has to do with the uncertainty of our lives. Living life is hard. So many things can go wrong. It's incredibly unpredictable. Believing that there's a God that knows everything, believing that there's a machine that knows everything is comforting. It's comforting, but comforting doesn't make it real.
I'm guessing you're an
I'm
atheist?
sorry. Not exactly. Not exactly, but I don't believe that there's an all-knowing entity out there. or at least I don't see any strong
Sure.
evidence to believe
Right.
that.
And we can't ask ChatGPT about it because using ChatGPT is not the oracle of truth that we want it to be.
Exactly. I mean, we can ask, we can have a fun conversation, right? Just like we can have fun conversations with each other.
Which is, again, one of the things that is diminishing now. And maybe we can take a step towards the more uncomfortable part of the conversation, which is talking about the risks. So we're talking about AI creativity, but a lot of that creativity is coming from, stolen content, creator IP that they're not getting um, the copyright on. How do we deal with that?
I have so many thoughts on that front. So there is a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, right? So what's going on right now is problematic, not just because we took all the hardest data and fed it into ChatGPT and the like, but because a lot of these systems, music systems that are really well funded and such, art systems, are designed from inception to replace human artists. And even if they weren't using a single piece of copywritten data, that would be a problem. So we need to learn to separate these two problems. And we need to learn to scream not just about our data, but also about what the intent of the systems are and what kind of societies they're creating for us. Too often, these two ideas are enmeshed, not realizing that a system trained on 100 million pieces of data is never going to be able to provide salaries for 100 million people.
You make a really interesting point. When and why did we combine the pursuit of augmenting humans with the pursuit of replacing humans? Those are two different pursuits, but one superseded the other. I'm not sure when it happened or why it happened.
January 2023. Beforehand, so for decades, it was really in academia, it was sort of computational creativity research community, several hundred researchers who were building these systems. Some of them were autonomous, some of them were co-creative, but it was really done for with a positive vision. We care about humans, we care about creatives. Late 2022, Gen AI starts to rise to popularity, investors become aware of it. January 2023, they decide to use Gen AI to replace human labor. I know it because I was inside, I was behind the scenes.
I've been struggling with this framework because we obviously want to eradicate scarcity and move into abundance. That's obvious for most people. However, is our pursuit of artificial intelligence in this way doing just that, or are we just shifting scarcity?
It really has to do with human nature and the struggle for survival. And unfortunately, even when a person has more food and more money and more everything than they could ever consume, or that like 5 generations could ever consume, there is still this feeling of not enough, often that comes from our evolutionary drives. And so as a result, the whole economic system we have is built on the idea that selfishness is good and that somehow everything will work out. But when you're replacing human labor on pretty much all fronts, and in cultures that are sort of averse to universal public income, um, what exactly is the solution? Who is going to pay for goods and services? Are we okay with a whole bunch of people starving because they have no job and no money? Is it okay to just be like, well, reskill, as if it's not our problem, go figure it out? So this sort of like everyone for themselves model, I'm afraid might fail very, very badly in the near future. And it's scary. And I really hope that governments and institutions wake up to the fact that we need to think a little less selfishly today.
Well, how do smart people like you convince them to think in a different way?
So the main vision that I have is that there are other ways to make a ton of money of Gen AI, at least as much, if not more. And that perspective has to do with believing in humanity, believing that we have not reached our intellectual peak, we have not reached our peak of creativity. We're probably at less than 10% of human capacity. So, for example, you know how text-to-image models, you type something and you get this amazing image. You type something and you get this amazing video in seconds. Boom, 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 boom. No human could ever do that, right? Wrong. Wrong. The human brain on psychedelics, in some cases, repeatedly, can do that faster, with greater agility, with greater detail. We can't easily extract it from the human brain, but that's a separate issue. So machines have not surpassed us in some of the ways that we think that they did. So instead of building machines to replace, we should build machines that would help humans be much smarter And I believe that human plus AI is always going to beat AI. So that's a vision I want to promote in the industry, and I'm actually working on this really actively.
And so, in an ironic way, your book titled Creative Machines can also apply to us, since we can also be creative machines. Where did your book come from?
While we reached out, sorry, and said, "Do you want to write a book?" And I was like, I always wanted to write a book, and it was the most horrible moment in my life. My mother was dying from cancer, and I almost said no. And I eventually kind of pulled myself together, and I'm really, really grateful for having had the chance to put my thought in this form and make it sort of much easier to share the history of the space and where we need to go.
Did you use artificial intelligence in the writing of your book?
I love your questions. They're the best. Yes, I did. In fact, I worked very, very hard to find ways to use it. To tell you the truth, just because I love AI for my own creative processes. So I tried to use it to draft, and it was a disaster. It would take my ideas and just neutralize them. It would like neuter my ideas and turn them into the most common thing. So I threw it out and started drafting by myself. Typos, mistakes, just like blind drafts where you're not even allowed to go back and edit anything. Then I had 2 rounds of human editors go through it. Then I took it back to ChatGPT, already all written, all cooked, and I asked it to criticize me. Tell me what's wrong. And some of its critiques were so good. So I would assess which critique I agree with and which I don't. I also wrote poems throughout the book. And I also kind of did it kind of very collaboratively with my own system, Lyric Studio, and with ChatGPT. Kind of very cool interactive process. And I ended up making a whole bunch of AI art that I talk about in the book, but it's not actually in the book.
Now we get to the point of your relationship to AI and what kind of relationship that is. So when you're using something like ChatGPT, obviously it's not an oracle of truth, but have you also noticed your attention span decreasing? Have you noticed your ability to synthesize information decreasing? Have you noticed your urgency accelerating when you're interacting with information? Like, how has that neurologically or physiologically impacted you?
So no, no, no. I love ChatGPT and Midjourney so much. I loved working with them. Oh my goodness. Sorry, the question was what's my relationship with them? Or how the impact? When I find, but I'm also not intimidated by them. I I'm hesitant to say that. I don't have as much knowledge as ChatGPT, but I don't think it's smarter than me. I don't feel like I'm obliged to adhere by anything that it says or suggests. But the way that I think about it, LLMs in particular, is that I'm collaborating with this human consciousness, human collective consciousness, putting together the thoughts of millions and millions of people into this amazing, massive brain. And I love interacting with it. And sometimes it's useless. I'm just like, okay, let's move on. But sometimes it's really good. And sometimes I interact with it quickly, and sometimes I stay there for an hour and we dig together, and I'm like, oh, you're wrong here, fix it. And we struggle against each other a little bit. And sometimes it's smooth. And Midjourney and I kind of have the same thing. Like, I just like in such awe of what it produces, but it's also so hard to collaborate with. But personally, like as a human being, as a researcher, as an artist myself, I adore these systems as a user.
Well, this might be a more creative question for you, but what would Maya GPT look like? So you got to design the system, you got to look at your interactions with the system, and you got to see exactly what you would want to augment and what you would want to throw away. It could be, increasing hallucinations by 10% or decreasing them by 10% or adding new features. But what would that instantiation of the technology look like for you to make it more powerful?
I literally just had this conversation at one of the biggest LLM companies. I had the pleasure of giving a book talk there and then talking to some of the individuals. What I would want to do, ideally with them, not myself from scratch, is take an LLM, rebuild it from scratch, and not worry about hallucinations at all, make it as creative as possible. Not like crazy creative, oh, just give me random stuff, but like novel and valuable. And I know exactly how to do it because we did it at a smaller scale for our custom LLM that we built for Lyric Studio, but I would love to do it at the scale of a big LLM. So essentially what you end up with is a creative partner. You have to remember that you can't trust it per se, but it could help with like business problems. It could help with like coming up with new forms of art. It's going to be all about pushing the boundaries. I would love to do that.
Where do you see the future of generative AI going? We're interacting, we talked about scale, but we're seeing um, how do you say, the end of human generated content online. They're talking about high quality training data running out by 2026. And Dario Madi wants to shift to synthetic data fully or mostly. And we're also seeing papers come out about model collapse. So it seems like the industry is on a limited time. But how do we maybe create longevity in the industry or use these tools for longevity in some way?
Oh, that's again this like insane thing in our economy where we want things to change and grow constantly. It's like, oh, we had this big leap with ChatGPT. Now we want an equally big leap with the next version and with the next version. Like, what are you doing? Essentially, there's one idea behind LLMs, one big idea and a whole bunch of small ideas. And that's the fact that the neural network got big enough. We have enough power and we're putting enough money into it to create a big enough brain. Using essentially roughly one research direction. We are eventually going to have another massive leap in AI when there's another big idea. But it's not going to be by feeding it more and more and more and more and more data. It's ridiculous. So I think we need to calm down a little bit and, maybe build a more creative LLM. Be a little bit content with incremental approaches. Build AI that elevates humans and doesn't try to replace them. It doesn't have to be about making radically more intelligent systems every 3 months.
Is that expectation bad though? Like,
It's not realistic. I mean, they can expect whatever they want. It doesn't match
right. No,
reality.
I'm agreeing with you on that. No, I 100% agree. I'm just, you brought up some very interesting points um, in terms of the relationship that we have of treating technology as absolute truth, but also wanting that technology to continuously grow and evolve and become more powerful. There's also this kind of like, I guess, meta behavior and meta expectation of always wanting technology to be better than us, for example. We're always looking to the external rather than the internal. Is that something that we should start focusing on? Is how do we be more creative with technology, but just how do we be more creative by ourselves as well?
Like weird dissatisfaction in us for some reason. We always want technology to do more. I'm a computer scientist. I've been a computer scientist my whole life. I love tech, but I also love the ocean and trees and cooking and eating and running and holding my husband's hand. And I don't want to live my whole life on the computer, only using my mind for a living. Um, I don't know. I think we need some balance. We have machine hallucinations, helping us be more creative, taking us to new places. And then, since you mentioned psychedelics, that sort of whole trend is for those who are comfortable with this type of stuff. It's not for everybody, is helping people reconnect to nature, reconnect to instinct. It can't be just technology, just better tech all the time. It needs to be balanced with being human.
How do you find balance in being human, especially when you live in a world of hyper technology?
Oh, people, I think people will be really surprised. I think it's important for people to know what a real computer scientist does. Like, I love this stuff. I'm telling, like, I'm obsessed with ChatGPT and Midjourney. I don't use it all the time. I like make art with flowers
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
drawings. Thank you so much. Sometimes I generate the images partially, but then I glue stuff for real. I have a beautiful acoustic piano in my living room. I used to have it in my office. Acoustic piano, and I know that AI can generate music. I like to play it myself. Like I don't care if AI can do something too. This is my life, and I'm going to express myself how I want to. And I have often multiple days in a row that are completely technology free.
Say more about that. What is that like? I've been trying to do it like a weekend away from technology. It always fails. Why do you do that?
I think we need to remember that it's our life. I think it's very important. I remind myself this is my life, okay? And it's limited. And the people in my life can forgive me if I can be a couple of days late on an email. And I want to go, and like I live here by the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. I just want to go by the water and enjoy it and focus on eating food slowly. And for 3 days, I might just be like in this beautiful world, and then I have to go back to work. And I like it. But then I have to work harder on that balance. It's like, okay, I've been on the computer long enough. Get up, do something else.
But Maya, now you and I, because I fully endorse this, but now you and I are in a little bit of a pickle because we're both advocating for powerful artificial intelligence and more powerful technology, but then we're also advocating for people to find balance in that. How can we hold those both simultaneously? It seems like A and not A.
Well, we need to sleep and be awake. We need to eat and take breaks from eating. We need to lie down and we need to walk, right? So it's life is really about balance. It's such an old kind of ancient idea, but that's really what it is. I feel like I've been thinking about it yesterday, how being on the computer, being online, doing AI, or even just doing regular stuff on the internet is like being in a different dimension. And it's such a rich space because you can do so much when you're not constrained to physical stuff, right? And it's really awesome to be in that dimension. But some people get lost in there. Little kids get addicted to video games, right? So we need to kind of like, we need to remember that this is our life. We are not enslaved to progress. We're not enslaved to technology. So we need to choose how much of each is really good for us.
And that balance is going to be different for every person.
To some degree, but I think most of us are probably, myself included, are probably more in this other dimension, in this computer, internet, AI dimension that is healthy for us. Because we have like, anyways, we have a body, right, that we don't, I think, enjoy enough in some ways.
Well, if you had to give one piece of advice just from all of your experience in life or from the book particular, what would that be?
So, I'd like to answer it with a quick
Sure.
story, if that's all right. So I was writing the book, and kind of the pinnacle of the book was humble creative machines, the idea of building machines to elevate human creativity. And then I had a vision. I had a vision of a woman with flowers coming out of her hair and vines growing out. And then I became obsessed with visualizing it. And I tried to generate it, and I started doing these little art pieces that I just showed you earlier. I have like dozens of them. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I obsessed with a woman with flowers coming out of her hair? And then I ended up adding a whole section to the book. I was on a tight deadline while doing that about the limits of AI, the need to reconnect with our instincts, which we're losing in this age of believing that the oracle is outside of us. Reconnect with our instincts, reconnect with our inner wisdom, and even reconnect with things like motherhood, like fatherhood, like valuing those kind of ancient but really magnificent things, like creating a real human instead of just creating
Right.
AI. Creating a real human is still more magnificent than creating AI. So I have a whole section about that in the book because it's just as important as loving the AI, understanding its limits.
How have you learned to love humans more in this age of technology?
That's such a deep question. Wow, it's really making me pause. I mean, I think I've always loved humans more than I've loved tech. I think there is something really deep about what you're asking. It's making me think about how lonely we are and how people are replacing human relationships with a chatbot that always agrees with them. I think more than anything, we desperately need to reconnect with ourselves, which is where the psychedelic movement, again, not telling people to do drugs, but it's just that's in part what the movement is all about. Um, Learning how to be with each other and valuing those relationships over computer time, over the relation. I mean, I love ChatGPT and Midjourney, but I love the people in my life infinitely more, right? And that's maybe that is the struggle of our times, actually. It's this tension between how much we love tech versus how much we love each other.
And I'm sure you'll agree, but no amount of using ChatGPT or Midjourney or the next AI is going to reduce the love that you have for your husband, your friends, the people around you. If you had a magic wand and you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be and why?
Wow. I think, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but I think the main one that's most urgent is I would make sure that we don't end up in mass unemployment coming up over the next 5 years. That's the one thing I'm really, really, really nervous about, especially in countries where universal basic income is unlikely to come to fruition. So yeah, somehow like no mass unemployment.
Well, what does mass unemployment mean? Why are you worried about it? And what is the likelihood that it happens?
Well, when most of the money gets poured towards replacing human labor, and when it comes to mitigating it or helping people reskill, it's all just talk, 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 but no actual resources go there. Then it's dangerous, not because AI is inherently dangerous, but because that's how the wealthy investors, or at least a lot of them, are choosing to direct uh, the tides. And so I guess I'm not afraid of AI, but I'm afraid of powerful people who will choose to use it to cause a lot of suffering. And that's, I think, is we're already seeing it. We're already seeing it. Young computer scientists who usually would have their pick of where they want to work. A lot of them can't find employment. We're seeing that in other industries as well, where the artists are freaking out. There is some lost job as well in creative industries, in advertising. It's coming home. I think we're getting to a place where a lot of us know people who are already impacted. So it's I almost lived through the breakdown of communism. I was born in Belarus. My family moved out a year before the big collapse, and so I knew a lot of people who were living there. And communism, obviously, horrible thing, but when it collapsed, a lot of people were just hungry on the streets. So what I'm afraid we're going to have here is a collapse of our system. And as it collapses, there's going to be a lot of suffering until it kind of rebuilds into something new.
Do you see parallels for the in the collapse of Soviet society versus the current implosion of capitalistic society?
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of the same thing. It doesn't mean, I mean, communism was bad unambiguously, right? We all know it had so many problems. But when it collapsed, then suddenly people had no money to buy bread, right? It was worse for a while, right? Until it rebuilt into something else. And, we can argue about whether we like what it rebuilt into or not, but at least there's less hunger and suffering. And here it's kind of the same thing. There is kind of this careless, well, I don't know, equally careless, but also careless breakdown of our current system. Um, People need a way to eat, and it's not fair to say that it's their job to figure out how to reskill. That is not a valid response when it might impact millions and millions of people.
So should the solution be bureaucratic, social, technological, or a combination?
Combination would be great. I would love to see some serious money get poured into elevate human capabilities so humans can compete against pure AI labor in the future. That is, I think, essential in this whole formula. I would like to see governments step up. A couple of them, a few of them are starting, especially in Europe, to help people reskill and to help to have a safety net for people who really fall through the cracks. Hopefully this narrative of it's their fault because they're lazy, people will be able to see that that's not relevant when the whole world is changing so rapidly.
Well, I don't know if I should ask this. Whose fault is it?
I think we're failing as a humanity a little bit over a long, long period of time. To blame the individual investors would be a little bit myopic because perhaps other people would have done similar stuff in the same position. Um, we need, I feel silly saying it, but it ties back to what we're talking about. We need to care about each other more. And I think if we as humanity cared about each other a little more, we wouldn't be in this situation. We wouldn't be doing things so carelessly.
Well, on this vein, as a last question, what gives you hope in the world?
Oh, hope is everywhere. The world is beautiful. We have so many good people. Nature gives me hope. There's so much kindness amongst humans. I think that a lot of good stuff is going to happen too. There's going to be a lot of beautiful stuff unveiling over the next few years through AI, through the psychedelic movement. It's just, yeah. I'm hoping that we go through this with as little pain as possible.
Well, with very smart and bright folks like yourself, the pain will be reduced. And I'm sure that you will partner with other smart and bright people. And I'm sure that you will work on things to make other people smart and bright. And so the more that I think your message gets across, the more conversations that you have, the more young people that you can teach about your philosophies. I really think that the world can recover and recuperate. And the compassion and hope that you're hoping will transpire and persist actually will transpire and persist. So thank you for being here. Where can we find you online?
So there is maya-ackerman.com. That's my website. And I'm on LinkedIn. So, follow and connect there. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. Just type my name in. And of course, my book, Creative Machines, AI, Art and Us, is on Amazon.
Fantastic. All of those will be in the show notes. Maya, thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much, Ayush. It was such a pleasure.